No, he wants mama. Gizmo. I'll stop this in a bit. You're playing again. There. You sit. You sit. Oh, when you could sit. Very good. Very good. I'll eat it over here, though. Thank you.
Loyalty and perfectly do.
Very perfectly good. Sorry. 2 buttons. All right, let's try this again.
And we'll just do one verse since shy on numbers. Thank you, Laurel. Wow, it's nice having her around. We didn't have to sing a cappella. Oh, you can tell somebody was walking and somebody was driving. Oh, yay! Come on in. Our numbers have just tripled. This is great news. Oh, I am thrilled to see you. Welcome, welcome. Trina, can you offer our invocation? Thanks.
Father, we're grateful to be together tonight at Institute and to be able to have this opportunity to study the Gospels and life of thy Son. We ask that I be able to have thy Spirit to be with us, to be able to continue to feel the Christmas spirit and the joy of thy Son. And we say these things in Jesus Christ.
Amen. I don't know if you heard our opening song, Silent Night, but it was well with the Christmas spirit continuing on. I am going to introduce myself and then answer a question, and I would appreciate it. I didn't give anybody advance notice on this, but I really feel like you have to ask in order to get more out of a class. So my question is, what do you want to get out of the New Testament this year? And we're just going to be studying the Gospel of John in this class, but obviously New Testament is the whole come follow me. So what do you want to get out? My name is Lynn, and I think my main goal is to feel the Spirit of the Lord while studying, while reading the scriptures. But usually I'm not asking you for such a general one. Usually it's more specific. You know, why didn't John the Baptist do this? Or why did the Lord allow this to happen? You know, those kind of questions usually what I'm doing. So let's start. Laurel, do you want to start and we'll go around, or do you want to go down with Becky?
I can start.
Okay.
I'm Laurel, and then my goal for the class is to learn more about Old Testament references within the New Testament.
Ooh, excellent. Even though the pen is not excellent. Good. Okay, just keep going.
Angelica, and I shared before, but I really want to see the miracles and be able to I guess also allow the Spirit to like guide and direct, and to increase my faith and to be able to witness those that are around us more often, as well as to have the faith to be able to allow those to happen.
Yeah, that's great. Keep going.
I'm Trina. I would like to gain a better understanding of Christ's true character.
Nice.
We're answering what's the question that we want to address. Because we're reading like the New Testament this year. You're next.
You guys can be skipped for a minute. You have only 1 minute less then. You're ready. Okay, Adam, go ahead.
I want to learn more about each one of the apostles and what drove them or brought them to following Christ.
Good. That's tonight. That's
Watch
great.
Lamb of God too. If you haven't seen it already.
Oh, yeah, I haven't.
Oh,
Yes.
it's so good. It's an oratorio. It happens around Easter.
Great.
I have it on CD.
Yes, yes, yes. Jesse, do you want to be passed? We'll come back to you, or do you want to say something?
Okay, my name is Jessie, and I'm so glad we have Institute tonight.
Thank
I
you,
was
Jesse,
like
for
on
that.
my way here, but I was like making sure I'm on Zoom so I don't miss anything. I hear like
So that works.
my name, and I was like, I have to be there.
It's great.
So, and I think I just like the history, and I went on the Israel trip with you and the group, and it was just nice to be able to see time and like place and culture. So I think really for me understanding the culture.
Yeah, that's,
helps a lot.
yeah, it does. It does. That's great. Gordon.
What makes the Gospel of John different?
Oh, good. Keep going, guys.
Angela. And.
Think, learn more attributes of Christ.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Ephraim, I want to learn more about kind of like Gordon said, what John's objective is. And how his approach is different.
Great, good.
I'm Nick. I really love the New Testament because I feel like you get the best insight into like day-to-day Christ. So I want to learn a little bit more about how Christ thinks and approaches situations.
And you said your name.
Nick.
And I couldn't remember it. Thank you. That's pretty bad when it's 2
Yes,
seconds
yeah.
apart. No,
I got
it's.
this thing to
How can we forget Saint Nick? Oh,
the-
okay, Nick. Thank you. Got it. Keep going, guys. I'm just slow at writing, but you're fine.
I'm Sinclair. I was gonna say the words of Trina. I want to better understand Christ's character. Like if I know someone better, I can have a relationship with them.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you. Claire.
Hi. Okay, and I'm Jen, and I want to focus on all the different ways that we can model our lives after.
Oh, we finally got a pen that
I
works.
was gonna say.
Sharon?
I feel like I should start looking.
Wow, okay. Model life after Christ. Excellent.
And my name is Becky. I think the thing with Angela is about attributes of Christ.
Great. And I'm going to use this pen the rest of the time. I feel like if I look at the model of Joseph Smith, you have to ask the question in order to get a section of the Revelation. You know, you're not going to get an answer in your scripture study. You're not going to get a witness unless you ask. So I'm all in favor of asking before. And it's just a good reminder. So this will not be happening every week, but it's just a good reminder to do it. And I'm just overjoyed that we have 2 friends here that are not even bothering each other. They're really
know each other.
I know they know each other, but this is really amazing that and just as a heads up, I don't know if they're gonna come the whole semester or not, but I have 3 friends who have never investigated any Christian church, but are interested in learning about the Gospel of John, who will be coming. And they said, now, is do you have a class for beginners? And I said, yeah, you're 30 years old, you went to Harvard for your undergrad and MIT for your grad school, you have a PhD, you really want a Bible for beginners? He said, yeah. So we'll see what happens. I don't know what's gonna happen. But I wanted to talk, before we get into John, just a little bit about the ending of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. This period of time between the two testaments. And who in the Old Testament, just say one person that was in the Persian Empire in the Old Testament. Who's one of our prophets or people that was Esther with the Persians? Is her husband the Persian king, or is he I think he's Persian, not Greek. She's 400 and something. Anybody remember if Esther is the Persians? So
Yes.
the Persians are after the Medes.
Right?
And that's the hard part, is because one of the books get the Medes and the Persians in the wrong order. So the Bible has it wrong, but one of the Bibles does. Chronicles and Kings have it a little bit off. But the Persian Empire comes across and all the way to Greece. And that's when the Greeks revolt. And the Persians supposedly were really good on land, but the Greeks were the Navy folk. And they learned how to make these reed boats and the wooden boats, and their naval forces were phenomenal. And so they were able to start taking over. And the Greeks had it's an easy date for me to remember. Let's just do the timeline really quick. From the Old Testament, who's 4,000? BC. According to these are only numbers in the Bible. I'm not using historical numbers. 4,000 BC. Adam. Very good. 3,000 BC.
Abraham.
Nope.
It's Noah.
Noah. Very good. And then 2,000 is
Abraham.
Father Abraham. Very good. We got him finally. And 1,000 is King David. The temple is about 950. But he's made king in 1,000. And then, of course, we have 600 is the second of the Babylonian is it I or Y? Exiles. So that's the Book of Mormon time period, whatever. But interestingly, 325 is when Alexander the Great starts conquering, 323, and then 325 AD is the Nicene Creed. So those two are BC AD. That's a little bit easier. If you know what I'm talking about, they're easier. If they're not, you don't know what I'm talking about, it's not easy at all. So we are down in this period before the birth of the Lord, when Alexander the Great comes through to conquer. And unlike the Romans, he says, everybody's going to learn my language. And by the time of the New Testament, they did not have Hebrew Bibles anymore. All we have from that time period are the Greek Bibles. And they got a group of 70 scholars together, and it's supposedly 72 men in 72 days translated the Hebrew scrolls. The Hebrew Bible was not canonized. They just kept having these scrolls. So they'd have the Torah. What's the Torah?
5 books of Moses.
5 books of Moses. And then they had that's the law. So there's the law, the Pentateuch. And then they have the law and the prophets and the writings and all these different scrolls. Remember, the 12 prophets were together as one. The 12 minor prophets were together in one long scroll. But in the Septuagint, they didn't make their scrolls long enough. And that's when they divided the 12 minor prophets into 12 little books with Jonah and Micah. And in the Septuagint, I don't know if any of you remember this. In Isaiah, do you remember it says, the wolf will lie down with the lion? And I like the lion will lie down with the lamb because of the symbolism of the Jews are going to accept Christ. But it's the Septuagint that says the lion will lie down with the lamb. So that's why we have all the pictures of the lion lying down. It's the Greek version of the Old Testament. So when they are translating it into Latin for the New Testament, they're translating it from Latin from the Greek, not from Hebrew. So this is very interesting in our language etymology, that by the time of the New Testament, all the Jews are speaking the language of Babylon, which is Aramaic. So the Lord in the New Testament Some other tongue would have been Aramaic. And the educated would have all been able to speak Greek in order to read their scriptures. And at age 5, every young boy starts studying the scriptures unless their parents need to have them still working in the farm or on the farm, you know, whatever. But if you have enough servants, every young boy at age 5 who's Jewish can start learning to read and write. I still think they knew how to read and write Hebrew because Paul says he did. So I'm thinking, okay, just because we don't have the records doesn't mean they didn't do it. You know, so I still think there must have been some Hebrew, but suppose that the only records we have from this time period are in Greek. But you know, they did do a few destructions in about 70 AD that sort of wiped out all of Israel when the Romans came through and wiped everything out in 70 AD. I am sure that a lot of records were destroyed. Anybody else want to add anything to the Greek Empire? They covered the language, the culture. I went to the Louvre again over Christmas, and I was trying to teach my 7-year-old grandson the difference between the Greek sculptures and the Roman sculptures. The Greeks are completely nude. The Romans have a scarf across them. You know, that's about it. That's about the only difference you get. So Romans are a little less open about their body states. Gordon, move over one. We got to squeeze in one more body here. Come on in. Do not sit in the back. We only thought we'd get 2 or 4 people, so I'm trying to put enough chairs up. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. Thanks, Gordon. The Greeks really dominated everything intellectually, but the Romans had a stronger military. And so by the time of Julius Caesar in 46 BC, they have then conquered and taken over. And there are 8 Caesars in the New Testament. And Julius is not one of them, but Augustus is. And Augustus is adopted son, is the adopted son, and he's the one. I've talked about him in the past, but he'll be all over the New Testament. He's the one that decides to have the Senate deify his adopted father. So he says after Julius Caesar has died and after he's crowned as Caesar, he says, Julius was a god, so that makes him a son of God. So on his nomenclature, on his coins, he has son of God and Prince of Peace, because he stopped all the wars by saying, I'm a monarch, or I'm the head honcho. We're not going to do as much democracy as you used to have here. We're now doing it my way. So I'm stopping all the wars and no one's fighting. You're just obeying me now. That's who became the Prince of Peace. I mean, the complete opposite of what we usually think of a Prince of Peace. You know, he did it Napoleon's way. We're not gonna have any more wars. You're all gonna pay allegiance to me. The other thing that what were some of the other things about him? I'm so glad you're here. Becky, do you want to slide down one? We'll get one more chair in here. McKay, just pull up a chair here at this end. Okay, so Caesar Augustus claims to be the son of God, claims to be the Prince of Peace. Anybody else remember anything else about him? They changed the calendar. We have a Julian calendar from Julius Caesar, and Augustus changes it so that the new year will start on the year of his birth. Anything else about Augustus Caesar that I'm forgetting?
He added 2 months,
2 months?
wasn't it? Wasn't he that added 2 months to the calendar?
Oh, 2 weeks maybe, because you go from
Oh, I'm talking about July and August. Julius.
oh, the
Augustus.
names. Oh, of course, the names, yeah. But he also started a solar calendar, which is 2 weeks longer than the lunar.
Oh,
But yeah, 2 months of the names. Very good. Yes, we get a named calendar, right? Well, this is great news. We are now doubling the numbers that we expected tonight. I'm so glad you're here. Anybody else have anything you want to add about the intertestamental period? The Jews are scattered all over the place, and the Jews from all over the Mediterranean are from the different tribes of Israel. And there's 10% in the major cities. The three major cities are Alexandria, Rome, and Antioch. I think those are the three largest cities, and they all have about 10% Jews in them. Well, I call them Jews.
10% of Jews or 10% of the cities?
10% of the cities are Jewish. That's a lot of Jews. And I'm using the word Jewish as it's used in the New Testament. Which tribes are Jewish in the New Testament?
Judah and Benjamin.
All 12. So Paul calls himself a Jew, and he's from the tribe of Benjamin. And then the second witness of the temple when baby Jesus brought in at 40 days, Anna, is from Asher. So you've the Babylonian exile was for the southern tribes, but the northern tribes was 721 with Assyrian exile. And these 10 tribes that we say are lost are scattered all over here. So if you're a Jew in Rome, you probably are from one of the northern 10 tribes. Asher is living in Jerusalem, and only 1/6 of the Jews are living in Israel at the time of the New Testament. All the others, now that one I said correctly, I hope. 1/6 of the Jews are there, and so that means 5/6 are living all over the Roman Empire. Yeah, Lolly.
Just for comparison, do we know relative size of Jerusalem to these three big
Okay, so
cities?
Jerusalem is between 20 and 25,000 people within the walled city. But it's like saying San Francisco versus the Bay Area, I think. I think there's a lot of Jews outside of the city.
And Rome at the time for comparison. is
Oh, can somebody look it
millions?
up? Ask Google what size Rome is.
What year, what year?
What should we do? 33?
Rome at its peak was over 1 million people, but in ancient times, it was really variable.
Well,
Could be.
before Nero's fires, we definitely wanted.
Oh, it was only,
Before
no,
the
before
fires.
Nero's fires was, so compared with China, it's like 250,000, if I remember correctly.
Oh, that's enormous. Okay,
Yeah, during the first and second century CE, the population of the city of Rome is conventionally estimated to 1 million inhabitants.
that is huge. So Jerusalem really is tiny. If it's 20 to 25,000. Although it's interesting because I don't know if you remember during the Passover in the Old Testament, they say that they were to collect everybody that's coming to Passover has to have at least 10 people eating one lamb because they don't want to waste any of the food. And so if you keep that law going into the New Testament, 10 people eating one lamb, Rome wanted to know how many people are coming into Jerusalem for the Passover. And so the Roman governor counted the kidneys of the slaughtered lambs. 1 kidney per lamb was kept to do their counting. And according to Josephus, they came up with 200,000 kidneys, which would say 263,000 kidneys. So
2.6 million.
that's what Josephus's numbers are saying. So how do you go from a city of 20,000 to 2.6 million? So I think, okay, even if we took off a 0, even if we cut his numbers in half, 1.5 million, 1.3 million.
I know, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, 2 kidneys. No, how many got thrown in? Is he exaggerating? Anyway, the idea is you have a huge variability in that population, and that's why the Jews said on a Sabbath day journey and on the Passover, you're supposed to stay within the wall, but that didn't work. And so they said, okay, we'll do 1,000 feet or a kilometer, 1,000 steps, 1,000 yards outside of the city. That's the new city wall. So it goes clear over to Bethany. So it goes about 6 miles outside, and they just have a pretend wall of the city that they use during these times to be able to live the law of the Sabbath and stay within the wall. But we're just going to have a pretend wall. And I just think
That seems kind of high.
I mean,
it seems very high.
there are cities in Middle America whose populations double for football games.
I lived in one of them. Green Bay Packers. Yes.
More
Yeah.
Nebraska, where they're a little bit smaller cities, but they literally do double in population size for the big football games because everyone comes from all over the states.
Well, I was just going to say, by comparison, China is like less than 15 million people. around the same period, the early Roman.
Oh, in early Roman Empire, 60 million.
Not Roman Republic, Roman Empire.
Yeah. So
They
this,
were comparable in size.
and the Roman Empire is pretty strong until about 400, and that's when the Huns come in and take it down. So they're there for a while, but it's really helpful to learn a little bit about the Roman laws and things like that to understand how it affected Jesus in the New Testament. But it's even more important in Paul's time when they're out in Ephesus and Corinth, and they're in those things. Then we say, okay, what's the Greco culture? What's the family life like? What are they eating and drinking, and what are their hours and their dress, which honestly wasn't much. Now that I've just explained what the statues were wearing, but they really did cover up sometimes. Another thing about the historical background of the New Testament before we start John chapter 1 next week is the family of Herod. So for some reason, Herod's dad had political clout under Julius, and Herod's father was put over this area as a general. But I should first tell you what happens in between. I forgot to talk about the Maccabean revolt. Do we have any good Jews in the room who want to talk about the Maccabean revolt? Okay, first Maccabee and second Maccabee describe this period of history in the Jewish world. So after, I think it's about 175, the Greeks have sort of been leaving them alone. The Romans, the Persians helped them, the Medes helped them, the Greeks helped them initially, but by 175, we got this awful leader named Antiochus IV. And he wanted to take over Jerusalem. He was mad at the Jews, and for their lack of obedience or subserviency or whatever, he comes in with pigs, and he puts them on the altar, and he sacrifices them to Zeus. Yeah, in the temple. And he starts killing anybody who's going to oppose his leadership. And the family that gets mad enough are priests. And John Hyrcanus has 5 sons, and they go into hiding. They leave the temple now that it's been decimated. Who built the second temple? Do you guys remember who's the second temple builder during the Old Testament? Who comes back and builds that temple? It starts with a Z. No, he's not a prophet. That's our problem. Cyrus is the Persian guy who lets him come back. Exactly. And then they call that temple Zerubbabel's temple. But then Zerubbabel's temple becomes Herod's temple. So Herod wants to expand this little one to this one, but there's no Shekinah, there's no spirit, there's no things like this. But as the family of John Hyrcanus go into hiding up in the mountains, they do something that I think the Americans must have followed a little bit. It's just good old Minutemen who come out and don't follow any of the rules. They stand behind the rocks and throw rocks at you rather than getting out in a straight line and shooting your bow and arrows. They become sort of guerrilla warfare, and they are so effective in this guerrilla warfare, and they gather enough people that they are able to take down Antiochus IV's group.
Isn't this when they started expanding who was considered a Jew? Because I remember.
Thank you. That's exactly what I'm getting to, because that's where Herod is. So they don't have enough Jews in Judea to do this fighting. So they go down to this area. They could have gone up to Samaria, because those are the leftovers of the northern tribes who've been intermarrying, but they've been enemies for now since right after 1000 BC. So they've been enemies for over almost 900 years. After Solomon died in 900 is when the northern and southern tribes split. So they don't say, could you come fight with the Sumerians? They come down here and get the Edomites. And Edom means red, and it's Esau's family. Who's Esau?
And brother Jacob.
Yes. So these are very distant relatives. It's going back to here. It's Jacob's, it's Abraham's grandchildren who they're getting. So we were relatives 2,000 years ago. Would you like to join us again? Kind of thing, it's very, very long distance. And they say, all of you, let's get circumcised and let's have you live our dietary kosher laws. And you can then fight with us and we'll be brothers. That is where Herod's family comes from. And he marries a Samaritan, and he is Idumean, and he is, there's one other Semitic nationality he's from, Idumean, Samaritan, and, it'll come to me in just a minute. Which one?
Syrian, I don't know.
Yeah, probably Syrian or something, but he is living the Jewish law.
Sorry, who's this?
Supposedly Herod's descendants, Herod's family joins Judaism at that time. So when Julius Caesar puts his dad up here, he had some link to, even though his habits and his lifestyle were all very, very Greco-Roman, he had some, by name at least, somewhat Jewish. But the Maccabean revolt, when they're in this 175, they want to purify the whole land. So they come in with their guerrilla warfare and they cleanse the temple, and then they go up to Samaria, and they go to, what's the place where the woman at the well is? Sychar is what it's called now, but I'm trying to remember what it is in the scriptures. Nablus is what it is now. It's Sychar in the scriptures. Okay, it's Sychar, and on the top of Mount Jezreel, the Samaritans had built their temple, where they did animal sacrifices, where they were living their law of Moses. And the Maccabees come from Jerusalem up and destroy their temple in 175. And so not only did they not want to invite them to join in, they are still really making a lot of enemies with their neighbors. And yeah, really, no freedom of religion in this one. Yeah.
Seasonal side note, doesn't Hanukkah date from
Yes,
Maccabean Revolution?
yes. And Hanukkah comes from Maccabees, the second book of Maccabees, because every time you have a dedication of a temple, you're supposed to have the presence of the Spirit through either fire or extra light. But there was no fire or extra light in Zerubbabel's, and there was no fire or extra light in the Maccabees at the rededication, when John Hyrcanus and his sons, his fifth son was such a good little fighter, Matthias, that they called him the little hammer, and that's the word Maccabee. So he became the best fighter, this hammer guy, and that's why it's the Maccabean revolt. But they're able to cleanse the Greeks out of the temple, and they want to rededicate it, and there's no light. So then about 100 years later, they rewrite second Maccabees, and they say, oh, no, there was a miracle with light. We just didn't remember it. And it's because the sacred light, the way the book of Leviticus says you have to prepare you have to put frankincense into the oil that's just been crushed. And it's what's the oil called? The first pressing olive oil is virgin olive oil. It has to be virgin olive oil. It's the first pressing. And anyway, so the Hanukkah comes from that second book of Maccabees that recalls, oh, no, there was a miracle with light. Hence, God accepted our temple, or accepted our rededication in their stories.
But when they had the idea that there was no light.
So if the Spirit does not, do you remember when Moses's tabernacle is going through the wilderness? What does the Lord send to accept it when he finishes? So he takes 7 days to build the tabernacle. Well, they've already gathered all the stuff. Then he takes 7 days to put it together because he wants to pattern it after the creation. And so Moses first does that badger thing to cut out the light and the darkness, to separate light and darkness. And then he adds this and this, and he goes all the way down. And then what does the Lord send at the end of the seventh day to accept his temple? That's why I called it the Shekinah, but it's that pillar of fire. And then at Solomon's temple, there's a pillar of fire. And then with Elijah and the priests of Baal, there's a pillar of fire. So they recognize the Spirit as a pillar of fire or a pillar of light. And so they're looking for a miracle of light to say, God has accepted and cleansed our temple. And so the Hanukkah is saying there was a rededication and that oil should not have lasted that long. The only problem is, of course, the text is written a century after the first text that said there was no Shekinah, there was no light. So it's a little delicate, but it's still Hanukkah. It's still Hanukkah. It's still, that's how we celebrate Hanukkah. Yeah. And some things are not recorded accurately, and some memories are not recorded accurately. So, you know, I'm not going to say anything against it, but it's just tricky when the two books are completely opposite. Not completely, just 90%. But Herod then comes from these converts. So he's very athletic. His dad was this great general, and he was right by his dad's side. So as a very young man, he is allowed, he's also good friends with Augustus Caesar. And Caesar says, hey, this is about in 40 BC. Why don't you, I'm taking over here. Why don't you come down and become king of the Jews? Because your great grandfather was adopted into the Jewish line. Remember, any Israelite is a Jew in the New Testament. So in the Old Testament, we got our 12 tribes. In the New Testament, they're all called Jews. So that's when Herod comes down to Jerusalem, and the Jews say, get off our property. And he says, I'll start crucifying you. And for 3 years, he just kills off anyone who opposes him. And he makes more and more and more enemies until he does something smart. And he takes the princess of the Maccabees. So your grandpa Maccabee, and down here is Marianne. And he takes Marianne, and Herod marries her. And then the Jews say, oh, we aren't going to kill you because you married our princess. And then Herod realizes after about 5 years of marriage that she has a greater right to the throne than he does. And that her sons definitely have a right to that throne. So her children are killed. She's killed. Short life, sorry. Yeah. And then he marries another woman and another. And he has 10 wives that he keeps knocking off. Jeez, and he has a lot of kids that he knocks off. Well, I don't think Henry killed him though, did he? Oh,
Yeah, several. But he didn't kill any of his children, that's the thing.
okay, he didn't kill his children.
It's like because he wasn't having children.
Yeah. Right time, the right time.
Children, he has the right gender of child. Yeah. Okay, I didn't remember he killed. No wonder she's called Bloody Mary. I don't. She got directly from her father, you know, her grandfather.
Well. And her own actions.
And her own actions. We will blame her. Bloody Mary.
Political and religious differences. I mean, the Protestant slant that calls her.
But she's mad because she's Catholic because he killed her mother. I'm getting it. I'm finally remembering my British history.
Anyway, go back to 2,000 years ago.
Yes, so going back to the Roman, going back to the Herodian lines, our awful builder is known for two things: his phenomenal engineering and his phenomenal, scary paranoia. And anybody that opposes him, he just can't handle it. He wants to take him down. And he had such a long list of atrocities that's written up in Josephus's writings that he doesn't include the slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem, the 20 little boys, maximum that could have been in that greater area of Bethlehem. Because you have about 200 to 400 people in a town, so that leaves you, and about 50% of the babies die at birth, you know, and about 50% are boys. Anyway, it comes down, if you take the greater area around Bethlehem, it could have had a maximum of 20 boys. They were under 2 years old at one time. But that's not even listed in his list of atrocities because he had so many that were a much larger scale, at least in the writings of Josephus. Yeah. So he reigned a long time. And I've often asked myself, why did the Lord let such a scoundrel reign for so long? But he gets really, really sick. Josephus describes it in great detail. He's ulcerated and his liquor is coming out of he calls it a slimy yellow liquor is exuding from every part of his body or something like that. It's just really revolting. And 5 days before he dies, he calls his sister in and he says, no. 10 days before he dies, he calls all the leaders of Israel to come down. And he has 5 palaces, and he's left his palace in Jerusalem. He's gone down to Jericho, where he has another palace, his winter palace, where it's nice and hot in the lowest city in the world. And he's in Jericho, and he calls all the leaders down to celebrate with him. And he locks them up in the hippodrome. And he tells his sister, at the moment of my death, I want all of them killed, because no one will mourn for me. But if every household, every leader in Jerusalem, every household patriarch is slaughtered, then all of Israel will mourn at my passing, even if they're not mourning for me. So
I'm surprised the leaders showed up.
yeah. Well, the leaders didn't know it. They just thought they were all coming down for a party. But that's what he told his sister. So he locks him up in the hippodrome, and then 5 days before his death, he assigns 3 sons. He had assigned 3 sons to take over, because he didn't want anybody to have as much power as he did. So he divided the kingdom in 3 so that no one would ever reign over as great of a kingdom as his. And then 5 days before his death, he kills those 3 sons because he gets mad at them for some reason. And 3 others are called in, and these are the 3. And these are the 3 that are in the New Testament. So this is at the birth of the Lord. And then we have Herod Antipas, who is the one who kills John the Baptist because of Salome's dance. And we have Archelaus. Now he is as bad as his father. And that's the one when Joseph and baby Jesus and Mary are coming back up from Egypt. It says, we came back to Bethlehem, but when we learned that Archelaus was reigning, we decided to go up to Galilee, because Herod was a little bit nicer than he was. So after 6 years of reign, Rome said, you know what, you really are bad, out of here, we want nothing to do with you. And then another brother came in, but he only lasted 6 years. They all marry each other's family, nieces and nephews, especially this one. So Phillips marries a beautiful babe, and this one wants her. And so she leaves him and comes to him. And that's why they killed John the Baptist, is because he said, you shouldn't be sleeping with your brother's wife. I said the word marry, which was probably generous for their relationship, but she becomes Antipas's wife. Herodis is the female. So she marries him, and then Herod Antipas. Sorry, this is her dad. But Herod Agrippa is her brother, and this is in Acts, and then Herod Agrippa II is in the last chapter of Acts, where Paul defends him. So anyway, you got this in the back of your scriptures. It's just nice to keep. If we can learn the Hogwarts families, we can certainly learn this one. And if I were to put up my pen, I'm sure I could figure out, yeah, some of the Bernice and Drusilla, yeah. Anyway, the Herod, King Herod, and then we have the tetrarchs. They call them tetrarchs because they're divided into 3 or 4 at a time. Okay, I got to get going. We talked a little bit about the second temple under Zerubbabel, but I don't know if you remember it from the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, but it wasn't anything grand and glorious. Not only did it not have the spirit there, it wasn't fabulous. And so that's when Herod said, I want to make this the most beautiful. So he chops off the top of Mount Moriah. What happened on Mount Moriah in the Old Testament? Just name a few things.
Isaac was on the second.
Abraham and Isaac. Keep going. Yeah, excellent. Great. Abraham and Isaac, number 1. Most important. The threshing floor of Boaz. Actually, maybe it wasn't Boaz. It's the threshing floor of somebody's, because Boaz is down in Bethlehem. Melchizedek, king of peace. And remember, Melchizedek is in Hebrew is MLK, which is a nice thing for us to remember. It means king of, yeah, MLK in Hebrew is king.
Okay.
And then Zadok is righteousness. So Melchizedek's name may have been his title, King of Righteousness, because Melech is king. In the Book of Mormon, what is MLK? Take out the vowels. Who are the people who are MLK? The Mulekites. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's from the same family because it's the kingmen. Because these are the ones who live in 600 BC, but they don't come with Lehi's family. They come with the baby of King Zedekiah. Do you remember Zedekiah has his eyes poked out? I don't know how closely you read the Old Testament back here, but he is taken in chains. He watches all of his sons be killed, and then he's taken in chains, and his eyes are put out after he watched all of his sons killed. And he is then drugged for the 3-month walk to, or I hope he had a ride, I don't know, over to Babylon, where he was then imprisoned. But the baby, the nursing baby, was not there. The nursing baby is over with the midwife or the wet nurse, and that's the one that came to the promised land with the Mulekites. They describe that in the words of Mormon. And this group of people are called the king's people, and it's spelled Mulek, but they don't have vowels in 600 BC in Hebrew. It's MLK, it's king. These are the king people. So when they start calling them king people 300 years later, I think it's still saying back from this time when they were called, we are protectors of the king. We are protectors of Zadok, of Zedekiah's baby. But anyway, Melchizedek lived there too. Anything else on Mount Moriah? They start building the temple there, but it was already sacred space. And it wasn't just Abraham and Isaac, but do you remember Melchizedek's people were translated up to join the city of Enoch? I think that's in the Joseph translation of Genesis, like Genesis 24 or something like this. And they are taken up to join the city of Enoch. And that's why Abraham wanted to go. He said, I sought the blessings of the fathers. I wanted to be translated. I want this priesthood. I'm seeking this. He's not seeking the priesthood of his dad. His dad tried to kill him on the altar. You know, he wants this priesthood. Well, I think it's very interesting that David knew exactly where they were supposed to build the temple.
So is this also where Muhammad?
So
Like,
that
where's
is,
the timing on that?
this is interesting because 600 BC is the Babylonian captivity, and then 600 AD is when Babylon's living where he is, and then about 150 years later, the story comes out that he actually lived in Jerusalem. But that is probably about 750 AD when that story starts coming to pass. So it's not as old as when he lived there. There's no evidence that he lives there, but that's again, history differs.
The Muslim religion does believe that
Yes.
Ishmael was almost sacrificed on Mount Moriah. That's the Tomb of the
Yeah,
Rock.
yeah. That's, and they do believe that he went there. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, I've said it enough times. We don't need to repeat this again. The New Testament has all 12 sons as Jews. So we call them Jews if they're any of the types of Jacob. This is so fascinating. Becky and I were just here last week. This is the aqueducts of the Roman Empire. And I really feel like we will get more out of the New Testament this year than we ever have before, because we actually understand the Old Testament better than we ever have before. I'm speaking for myself as well as collectively. I hope everybody has a better understanding of the Old Testament than we did before. But I really feel like the New Testament is based on all these prophets, and it's just going to be awesome to be able to get a picture of the New Testament from understanding the Old Testament better, because this was their scriptures. These are their gods.
Well, trying to understand kind of the mindset of the New Testament, I think you talked before about how the writers and the editors of the Old Testament were focusing on salvation through the law, and the law was what was important. So it seems to me like some of the Jews at Christ's time were focused on the law, and that's what they, everything was law.
It's very clear.
Some seem to be waiting for a Messiah to rescue them and bring them back together, and then some seem to be ready to fight with Christ against them. So were they kind of this opinion that like we didn't keep the law, so we were scattered, but if we keep it, we'll come back together, and then Christ came to obliterate that law?
Yeah, and I really feel like it's not fair to say all Christians in 2023 believe the same thing either.
Yes.
So I am sure that your nice spectrum of thought was very accurate, rather than saying not everybody was expecting a conquering Messiah to fight against the Romans, but did many of them? Oh yeah. Did the leaders?
But was it an imminent view? I mean, we look at Latter-day Saint early history and they thought it was imminent.
Okay.
So was it?
The reason why we know it's imminent is because they had taken the book of Daniel. And I think Daniel says in 70 years, Cyrus is going to be born and he's going to let you go back. And then Daniel keeps writing and he says, in 70 times 7 years, the Messiah will come. So it's been 470 years. And they say, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming. And that's why they say, John the Baptist, you must be the Messiah. I really think that it's Daniel's text that got everybody triggered onto this. And so they begin combing through their scriptures, looking for the prophecies of the Messiah. And that's why they say, Jesus, you don't fit the mold. We've got just a few minutes to talk about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, or 2 minutes to talk about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because we're going to spend a lot more time on John this semester. But the synoptics are so beautiful. And current biblical scholarship is the authors that traditionally say they wrote these books are not right. The books were edited over many, many years. But the good news is we have about 600,000 Greek copies of the early text, and there are very few differences. So the changes that were made had to be like before 70 AD. So we have text starting from really, really old, and they seem to be, so I go back often to the earliest historical records like Eusebius or Josephus, and they say Matthew was also known as Levi. He's the apostle in the book of Matthew, who was the publican, and he calls himself Matthew right here on this verse. So that's the earliest Christian writings say that. Was it really Matthew? I have no idea. But in this context, I would rather trust the oldest source than the modern source saying, I need to publish something new, so I'm going to come up with a new idea just because I work with these people. So I know how desperate they are to publish. And then John Mark is the little boy in the book of Acts who is running around Jerusalem at the death of the Lord. And his mom owns the house where all the Christians are gathered in Jerusalem. There's 120 gathered at her house, according to the book of Acts, after Christ's death. And they're all hiding there. And so he is raised in a lot of wealth. Yeah, exactly. Especially in Jerusalem. I mean, it's really amazing. So he's raised with a lot of money. He and his mom are converts. And he becomes, as a young boy, a junior disciple or a junior missionary companion to Paul. But he gets homesick and goes home. So on the second mission that Paul goes on, Barnabas, who's Paul's companion, says, come on, let my nephew come back. Let Mark have another chance. He's older, give him another chance. Paul says, I am not taking him on. And Barnabas says, I want him. And so Paul says, then you take him. I'll take Silas, you take Mark. And that's when Paul and Barnabas no longer are missionary companions, because Uncle Barnabas loves Marky. And then Mark grows up, all of his life in the church, active, and he becomes Apostle Peter's companion in prison in Rome under Nero. And so the writings of the ancient church say that Mark was the scribe who wrote down Peter's text. So Peter said, we got to get this written down. And Peter says it, and Mark records it. So that's one version of how Mark came to pass. So I look very closely at Mark's gospel and say, is there Peter's personality in here? First of all, does he include Peter's denial? Yes. Does he include Peter walking on water? Yes. Does he include this? Which I thought was interesting. I thought, okay, if I were telling my story, would I want to tell my denial? And he does. I'm just so proud of him. You know, everything is there, but it's also, it's the fastest movement in the gospel. It's the shortest. He uses the word immediately 40 times. It sounds a lot like Peter. Anyway, I think there's textual evidence that suggests this, and then we get more information on Mark in the book of Acts too. And then, you know, Luke is our wonderful doctor who's a Gentile convert. And he says, I was not there. I was not an eyewitness. I went around and I interviewed everybody. And he writes 2 volumes. He writes the book of Luke, and then he writes the book of Acts. And the way that Come Follow Me is organized this year is all in harmony. And it is really frustrating to read it that way unless you have something like this. Otherwise, you're changing pages all the time. So this one is okay. The reason why I like this one is because it has all the Joseph Smith translations written in, so I can see them. This one is really good. But it's not the King James, and there's other options available too. But it's just a little bit easier to say, well, this side's in Greek. That part is not easier to read, but it's just a little bit easier to say, what do they have in common? Where are they different when you can compare them at the same time? To say, what is this author trying to say? And I got to end. I'm going to show 2 more slides. Mark is shared almost entirely by Matthew and Luke. 93% of everything Mark wrote is by Matthew and Luke. But in one of my grad schools, I had to take Mark's gospel and take the others and write down every word that was changed. And sure enough, Mark is writing sort of like a 8th grader, and Luke is writing like someone who went to Oxford in literature, you know. And so Luke always cleans up the Greek and puts it in better grammar. And Matthew always adds the Old Testament stories and the Old Testament parallels and stuff. So it's really interesting to see. But about 50% of Matthew is shared from Mark, and about 50% of Luke is shared from Mark. But then Mark and Luke also share, just the 2 of them. And so there came up a theory out of the German school that said they must have had another common source. And the word source in German is Q. Anybody speak German? Okay. So they call it the Q source. They call it the Q. I know, it's sort of silly, but in English we say it's the Q. So Mark and Matthew used Luke. Luke also interviews his own people. We have a little bit of oh, I don't have that one down, do I? No, exclusive information. So Luke interviews his own people, but then Matthew and Luke also share. And then John is completely different. So these 3 are called the Synoptic Gospels because they have a lot in common. And John doesn't share hardly any information. You know, he has like 23 miracles, 52, 7. You know, just very, very different, night and day different. They really have a lot of variety. So next week we'll start with the Gospel of John, and I told you I was not going to say any more because we're over time. So I will not explain this slide. I will go right back up and restring. I'll start there next week. We'll start with John chapter 1. And I hope that in your scripture study this week, you can remember some of these questions and that you can ask for them, that the Lord will pour out His Spirit as you study. And if I get too carried away with the historical background and don't bring enough the Spirit in, please bring it back into class and add the things that you feel the Spirit, because I am sometimes a little more like Peter and get carried away with something and jump out of the boat faster than I should. So I apologize. But I love the New Testament and I love the Lord in the name of Jesus Christ again. And my one member of the committee has left us to go get his delicious food ready.
No,
Oh, Gordon, you're back. Hi, your seat's got a purse on it now. Do you want to announce what you're serving before we have the prayer?
trail mix.
Oh, great.
Cookies.
I thought you had gotten all out there preparing it. Great, 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 great. We'll leave this room. No need to leave the room. Becky, I'm so glad you're here. Becky's just on her way back to BYU. Can you please offer our closing prayer? Thank you.
Heavenly Father, thank you for Lynn and the time and effort she put into preparing this lesson for us, and for the world and all the people who have lived in it, and all the records that you have, that we can learn about so many things before us, and especially thankful for our Savior and for the time that we and information we have to learn more about him, and ask that we may become more like him. We love thee, God, and say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Becky. My handouts are all online because the New Testament is not 2 pages. It's usually a little bit long. I'm sorry. But luckily, Book of Mormon Central has now hired a professional editor for my handouts. So my Markian attempt is now going to turn into a little closer to Matthew or Luke rather than. Feel free if you want to check sources or anything, just get on Book of Mormon Central, which is now changed as of January 1st to Scripture Central, because I got tired of saying, we're not supposed to be doing the Bible for Book of Mormon Central. And then, of course, they said, okay, what name do you want to be called then? So sorry about that. Thanks, great. And Becky, do you have your chocolate stuff too? Do you want to pass that out too? Gordon wants to. Here's a table right here. Right here, Bex.